Afternoon all. Some very exciting games are being played at the candidates today. Let's have a look at the game Levon Aronian against Mamedyarov. So Levon playing white played d4. Mamedyarov responded with knight f6 after c4 e6, as though it's going to be a Nimzo Indian. Knight f3, Queen's Indian territory, d5, and it looks as though it's transposing into a Queen's Gambit declined. And now after Nce3 Bishop b4, it's a kind of mix of the Queen's Gambit declined and a Nimzo Indian strategy. So in this position in light book, c takes and Bishop g5 are the main moves, either taking or Bishop g5. Bishop g5 was chosen. Knight bd7 is the most common move. C takes, e takes, and here the most common moves are usually e3 or Queen c2. Levon maybe created a surprise move here, knight d2. It actually unpins the knight on c3, so threatens knight takes d5, a concrete threat now. So black guarded the d5 pawn, just to demonstrate if castles, then we can just play knight takes d5. There's no major repercussions here. Okay, so the d pawn was guarded, and now e3, and now usually castling is simply castling has been played before 18 times in light book, or Queen a5 9 times. We see knight f8. This might have some drawbacks, some downsides, knight f8 potentially, because on g6 maybe it's subject to attack. Levon now plays bishop d3, and after knight g6, is the knight a future target on g6? White for the moment castles, and black castles, and now perhaps you might consider this a little bit of a surprising move, f4, and it is trying to make an issue potentially of this knight on g6 for a tempo gain with f5. Of course it creates a backward pawn, but is black in a position to exploit this backward pawn on e3? The other issue, the bishop's blocked in now, and actually black can force white to trade the bishop by playing h6, and that's what he did. So bishop takes f6, virtually forced. There's no other. Well, actually there is another move to consider, f5. That might be playable as well, but bishop takes f6 is given us a little bit stronger by the engines. That's consistent with white's play here to try and use that knight on g6 now with f5. So gaining space, blocking in this bishop for a moment. Now after this next move is actually quite crucial here, and I think from a philosophical perspective this is really interesting, and a practical perspective. Just to put this a bit in context, yesterday Mamedyarov had a very hard game against Topalov, was pressing I think for a win, may have been a bit tired today. He's a brilliant tactician. I wonder what you would play here with black if I gave you 10 seconds starting from now. There aren't too many candidate move possibilities, so what would you play here with black? You might want to pause the video. So you can either lose 200 points or gain 100 points if you find the so-called computer move. So starting from now. Okay, let's start with knight h8. If you played this, then you don't really care about knights on the rim. That's an extreme rim, extremely dim knight on that outside corner, and that would be a miserable position. I think white is just clearly better there. It just looks anti-positional. I think white could continue with all sorts of things. The knight's just out of the game. So normally as humans we want to keep the knights near the centre. Knight h4 I guess is another legal move to consider, which actually might be okay actually just about. After Queen h5 there's no major loss of material for black, and you might think is the knight getting trapped with g3. In fact g3 here, there's Queen g5 and the knight's kind of okay with this pin. The knight's actually getting out off the g6. It's not really that easy to win this knight on h4. So knight h4 is playable. Knight h4 seems anti-positional. Sorry, knight h8 seems miserable. Knight h4 seems playable. The computer move, though, if you found it, give yourself 150 points or more. So queen g5 is amazing because it has a very fast awareness of the loss of the dark square bishop. These dark square points are a bit more vulnerable here, and we see that if fg, queen takes e3 check, we win this bishop on d3. So it's very interesting. This wasn't played, but it's a very interesting move, queen g5. If queen e2, and this was mentioned in the post-mortem analysis of the game, knight h4, and now if f6, for example, then black might actually be okay with rook e8. These dark squares are feeling a bit of pain here, and even though this looks like very, very aggressive to have a pawn on f6, this particular position might be backfiring a little. For example, e4 bishop h3, and then, for example, like this, tactics can even start up. And again, this loose bishop on d3 is an issue. g6 first, though, to avoid getting mated. And this apparently this is okay for black. Yeah, this is quite complicated actually, but this kind of position should be okay for black. Black has collected enough pawns, has got a rook for the knight and bishop. So fascinating stuff, stemming from this queen g5. But the players actually looked at, in particular, in this position, after queen e2, knight h4, e4, the move e4, forget f6, because f6 does liberate that bishop for the tactical possibilities. Now e4 is very interesting because it creates a backward pawn on d4. After takes, knight takes, queen d8 hits d4, but both players were quite jokey about this. Levon is quoted saying, he said, I'm sure for one thing he would prefer white, smiling, and his opponent Mamedyarov also smiled here. And it is pretty pretty darn dangerous for black. If this pawn is taken, we have a very scary looking position, which engines might indicate as playable for black, but it's I think you'll need a lot of guts to play this with black, this position with this pawn on f6. But black does have the dark square bishop. Is white going to mate black though? Rook a e1, and now there's a threat of queen d2 for queen h6. If rook e8, bishop c4. Apparently, technically, this is still okay for white. This is quite dangerous. So, for example, like this, rook takes, knight takes. But it's not over by any means. It's about technically it's about equal. There were some other also dangerous ideas for white in this position. Like here, white was actually threatening bishop takes f7 and knight d6 if bishop f5 wasn't played. So, for example, I think if knight f5, bishop takes f7 is still on here for actually knight g5 check. That's another way. So that's why bishop f5 here. Connect the rooks, protect e8. So anyway, it looks as though this was a survival method black, based on that computer move in inverted commas of playing queen g5 in this position. So not moving the knight at all. So in the game, now you'll lose 200 points for this, and there's a subtle reason that it's a major turning point of the game really to play knight e7. That's why I've mentioned these other knight possibilities. Can you see what white played? It's a really crushing move. It gets a big advantage. Arguably black is lost after this move. One of two moves actually, they have the same effect. So if I gave you 10 seconds here, what would you play with white? Okay, the queen's actually being victimized here after knight de4, temporary knight sack. So the queen is going to h4 now, but now g3, and the queen's actually getting trapped. So queen h3, knight f2 wins the queen for a rook. Of course, black could have also just played here. Queen takes f5. It's the same sort of thing, really. Rook takes f5. It's not really great for black. So anyway, Mamedyarov played like this to lose the queen like this. Now, I think he immediately realised apparently he'd slipped up when he played knight e7. So he's losing his queen. But there's still a few more moves played, quite a few more moves. Knight takes f5, queen f3. Hitting the knight, knight moves. e4. So e5 looks like a serious threat to parry. f6, trying to discourage e5. Bishop drops back. So bishop b3 could be useful. Or rook d1. Bishop e6. Now knight d3. Hitting the bishop. Black now plays knight c4, threatening actually knight d2 check, so ignoring that from the bishop, threat knight d2 check. King moves out of the way. Now the bishop is attacked. That moves to d6. Knight f4, hitting the bishop on e6. Now this is actually taken if bishop f7. In fact, here e5 is quite good. So for example, takes queen e4. It's all falling to bits. White has got that very dangerous queen. So bishop takes f4 was played. G takes. Rook ad8. f5 gaining space. Now with d4 attack, queen c3 protecting d4. Rook fe8. Bishop d3 kicking the knights back. a4. White's firmly in control here. It looks very unlikely for black to be able to set up a fortress, which is one of the common methods when this sort of material imbalance to try and draw the position. But after e5 we see that there's going to be an enormous pawn now on e6. So knight e7 e6, and now just in case this knight d5 is a nuisance, there's an option to take out the knight with bishop e4. Knight d5, the option to take the knight isn't taken. In fact, I don't know, is this that good? That blockade might be quite useful for black, but still, you know, white's technically better, but white doesn't need to do that. Queen h3 hitting the bishop. Bishop e2, and I think Levon wanted to safely get to the first time control. We're at move 35 here, so some non-committal moves, I think. Rook g1 though does threaten. Queen takes h6 immediately here with that pin on g7. King h7. Technically, in this position, rook takes g7 does actually win apparently. It's like +6. So for example like this, and queen h5 threatening queen g6. Apparently this is absolutely crushing. For example like this, queen g6 taking check, and e7. This is enough to win. Black's not going to be able to set up a fortress, but this wasn't played. Rook takes g7 wasn't played. Queen a3 instead. This is still on the cards though. Rook takes g7 as a threat. Bishop c4, and again here it could still be played with advantage apparently, but rook g4 was played. Bishop b5. Rook g1, but we're at move 39, so we're going to get extra time now after move 40. So a little bit of repetition. Rook c1. Bishop there. Bishop goes back to b5. So black is just waiting. Bishop f3, but this introduces something else in the position. Bishop f3 at move 41. So the extra time now, past the move 40 time control. Knight f4 was played. So knight d3 looks like a concern. This is parried with rook d1. King h8. And now a very, very powerful move indeed here at move 43 is played by Levon Aronian. He plays actually the move d5. Now, one of the points here is if c takes d5, then that takes away that square for the knight, and actually queen e3 embarrasses the knight quite significantly here. Check, for example, knight here, bishop h5, and I think we've now got on the cards h4 to trap that pesky knight. So this is bad news. So given this, black actually played knight takes d5, which creates a weakness of the last move. The knight's no longer controlling h5. Levon played bishop h5, and this is actually the final move of the game. Mamedyarov resigned here. So let's have a look at this final position. If rook f8, then e7 wins material. It's forking both rooks. If knight takes, we can just play queen takes, and we're hitting both rooks. So there's no time for this. We just lose f8 and we get mated to the next move. So this is no good to play rook f8. If rook g8, here e7 is very strong, as well as bishop f7 is actually even stronger. What does black actually do? If rook f8, again we just play e7. So black is losing that exchange, it seems, or the rooks get exchanged here. Rook takes, queen e7, and these pieces are loose. If, for example, rook c8, then queen d7, winning material. And I think this check is harmless. King e1 check, king d1, and black is going to get mated because there's always this bishop can come to g6. So if the knight moves, black just gets mated, like check, and mate like this, or even queen g8. So the final position does seem fairly hopeless after bishop h5. So missing the firework earlier of rook takes g7, but it doesn't really matter. A win is a win. Humans can win slowly. They don't have to play the absolute strongest move on every turn. So this is winning as well. If rook e7, then actually the rook is only protected by the knight. So in fact, either rook takes d5 to take on e7, or even he moves and queen takes. e7 is working here, crushing position. Knight takes, winning both rooks. And this is enough to win as well. Rook d7 just crashes through, say e7. So it's a bit of a slip up, and so if we go back to the critical moment, so an interesting bit of opening preparation seemed to really pay off well, maybe to make the opponent quite uncomfortable. This quite rare move, rare retreat, knight d2, with a very interesting aggressive follow-up. You know, this sort of stuff to follow up is very, very interesting, and quite a neat little tactical idea, punishing just the queen's inability to go in reverse here after knight e7, and it's only got that d6 square, and that's ruled out as well. So this beautiful tactic takes out that d6 square as well, forcing the queen to the only square h4, and then g3 kind of mates the queen after knight f2, protecting the pawn, trapping the queen. An amazing tactic to win this game. So securing Levon his first win in the tournament. It's only round 2 though, so he's still in the tournament as a major contender, of course. He's the highest rated player in the tournament, and the kind of bookie's favourite to win this candidate. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this game. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.